Hi, I'm Natasha Sinyanovich, and this is Women Like Sex, a myth-busting podcast that examines the many, many medical, scientific, and social facts about female sexuality that were never, in fact, facts, especially the very modern-day belief that women don't like sex as much as men do. I'll be speaking with experts, educators, friends, comedians, and more across a spectrum of ages, genders, and cultures to flip the scripts on myths and misconceptions that have long been dictated by not women. Together, we'll replace so much inaccurate messaging with healthier, smarter, factual facts and get the sex ed we wish we'd gotten. Few people have had as profound an influence on my career as this week's guest. Tracy DeTomasi is many things: a national leader, educator, and consultant on gender violence awareness and prevention, a licensed clinical social worker and sex health educator, and my dear friend. Now, I don't always like trigger warnings. In my profession, we tend to use them for stories we ourselves aren't comfortable with. In the news, we don't say, "Warning, we're about to talk about war." We just do it. But we so often use them when speaking about sex and sexual harm. In doing so, we inadvertently say the world's most prevalent, everyday violence lives in the shadows and maybe should stay there, which means keeping its victims and survivors in the shadows as well, while the harmers keep enjoying sunlight. That said, Tracy and I talk about sexual harm here, as we always do, openly and with a dose of dark humor. You'll want to listen because we talk about what it really is versus what most people think it is, in large part due to inaccurate or bad news coverage, which in itself is in all part due to unquestioned social norms and myths. We also talk about how harm is normalized, from the language we use to the way we, quote, separate the art from the artist when it comes to celebrities, who hurt children even. Best of all, though, you'll also get some of Tracy's very simple guidance on the best sex ed to teach kids, how to respond to, quote, "it's not all men," and what we can all learn from beaches. Even though the nonprofit Tracy most recently led folded this month, I'm still including some of our conversation about it to help convey that prevention efforts for the world's most prevalent violent crime does not come with a most prevalent amount of funding. Also, if anyone listening has ideas and money for using Callisto Vault's revolutionary service for sexual assault survivors, you'll want to get in touch with Tracy ASAP about acquiring the technology. I've been reporting on gender violence for almost a decade, and still, every time I talk to Tracy, I learn something. From new, updated terms to better ways to reframe what should be obvious but often isn't because of all the myths we've been spoon-fed from childhood. Tracy works tirelessly to undo those myths and the harm they cause, always with a ready laugh and a way to call out problematic thinking on the spot, magically without alienating the thinker. Last, but by no means least, if you enjoy this fully independent, no-string budget podcast, please consider supporting it at the level of your choice at patreon.com/womenlikesex. Thank you, and let's begin. I was doing an interview on a new police protocol for domestic violence survivors in Nashville, and I met you and two other women from the Family Justice Center. And that was also the first time I heard the term trauma-informed, because you all thanked me for being trauma-informed. I was like, okay, I'll take it. I like how it sounds. And sort of the flip side of that is when you were explaining how so many people in media will had reached out to all three of you and said, "Hey, could you get somebody who can cry on tape or who can cry on camera?" And I was like, oh, okay, hell no. It would never cross my mind to do that. And if an editor or producer demanded it, I would quit on the spot. So I was like, that really kind of sharpened into focus how I started reporting basically in free time that I didn't have as an anchor. If I did report, it was going to be on domestic and sexual violence.
Well, again, I still appreciate you for all of that because you are still the most trauma-informed journalist that I have ever come across. So,
well, that is high praise coming from my DV whisperer, my domestic violence whisperer. You and others, but it was so often you, taught me that some term was not good, was outdated, or was victim blaming unintentionally, or was passive. And yeah, the amount of times where, especially when I was doing that Pulitzer Center project, of like, "Tracy, what about this word? What about that word?" And we'll talk about language in a little bit, but enough about me. I want to ask you, what inspired you to work in these spaces? How long have you been doing it? When did that start, to work in gender violence, domestic violence, sexual assault?
I have been doing this work for 25 years, which is just I don't even know. Like, it seems like way shorter than that. And wow, I've still had to do this work for 25 years. I did a internship in undergrad where I worked with adolescent boys in a locked psychiatric residential facility. And all of them had experienced some kind of abuse, most of them sexual trauma, witnessed domestic violence, neglect, child abuse, all of that. And I realized that there was this world that I didn't fully know about, to be honest. And I really liked watching the growth of these kids go through therapy, but a lot of them were also perpetrators of harm as well. And then I went into grad school, and because I wanted to help people, I wanted to become a therapist, and I got an internship working with adolescent sex offenders. And my professor helped me get certified in being a certified counselor for a certified therapist for adolescent sex offenders in the state of Michigan. And I was good at it. I was able to hold space. And when people ask me, why did I do that work? I said, well, if you stop perpetrators who have offended already numerous times as teenagers, you're going to prevent sexual assault.
Right.
And the more I did this work, and the more people would say, well, what do you do? And I would say, oh, I work with kids who've experienced harm, or I work with sex offenders, or I work with adult survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence. And when I would tell people this, they would basically say, me too. They would tell me their stories. And a lot of times that would start with, I've never said this before, but. And so I quickly realized how pervasive sexual and gender-based violence was. And I have done a lot of different versions of it. Like I said, I started as a therapist for adolescent sex offenders. I worked in group homes for many years with adolescents, mostly boys, but also girls and trans youth that had experienced trafficking. I ran a domestic violence shelter, which is how you and I met.
Right.
And then I really started to think about, well, how do we solve this? Like, yes, there's a lot of services for survivors and for victims to heal, which is necessary and great, but that's not solving the issue. And so, we started a program at the time that was called MEND, and it was about getting men to end violence against women. And it was about getting to the culture. And that's what I really liked. It's like changing all of these words, changing, and I know we're going to talk more about language, but changing how we frame this to change the problem. And I've seen this arc. When Me Too happened, people kept tagging me in Facebook and on Twitter and stuff. And I was like, I don't get it. Like, why are you tagging me in all these posts? I know your story. I know your experience. And then I realized, oh, I sit with all of this information, and I know that this is the prevalence of sexual violence and domestic violence and sexual harassment. And most people don't see it. Most people don't talk about sexual violence at the dinner table or every conversation at the bar that they have or wherever they're at. And I always do, because to me, it's normal. It's unfortunate and tragic and awful. But depending on what statistics you look at, 1 in 2 women have experienced some kind of sexual assault or sexual harm. It is a topic that should not be taboo. And so I think that every year I do this, I get fueled by more and more people speaking out and by more and more things of we still have so much to fix. We've come so far in the 25 years that I've done this work, but we still have so much more to do. And that inspires me to continue.
And if I had my way, magic wand, every newsroom would have gender-based violence.
I mean, they should, right? Because I don't know nationally, but 50% of crimes in Nashville, over 50% of crimes in Nashville were domestic violence related. That doesn't include sexual assault.
Right. And in Memphis, when I was doing that Pulitzer Center series, both of the DAs in those counties were like, oh, yeah, they make up 50% of crime in our. And I was like, and Nashville and Memphis aren't outliers.
No, it's so underreported. I always said oh, how do we prevent gender-based violence and domestic violence and sexual assault? And we need the numbers to go down. I'm like, the numbers are going to go way up first.
Exactly.
Because it's so underreported. The numbers will skyrocket. And once they level out with the amount of social surveys that are done about people being sexually assaulted or victims of domestic violence, then we want them to go down.
That's something I teach both colleagues in newsrooms and emerging journalists in classrooms. Like when you see a story about how rape numbers have gone up and that's a bad thing and how it's the fault of the police or this and that, it's like, Whatever reporter did that didn't understand, and it's a rectum derived.
Yes.
They're relying on stereotypes. They're relying on what they know about carjackings, for one. I just thought of that because there's a podcast that Minnesota Public Radio does that I still get from when I was an editor, producer there. Rape and carjacking numbers go up. I haven't listened to it, but I'm willing to bet they're saying that both of those things are bad.
Maybe not people who are in the country illegally, or maybe people in certain areas that don't want the police in there, but most people report carjackings.
Yeah.
Those going up, that's probably a concern.
Yeah.
Sexual assaults going up is a reporting issue.
That's a nice segue into when I was doing that long series through the Pulitzer Center. About halfway through, I started asking people, yourself included, who fails victims and survivors the most? By the time the criminal justice system is involved, if you do go to police, if you do make it to the courts, so who fails people the most? And all but you said friends, family, people who don't recognize what sexual and domestic violence really are and really look like, or, rabbis, teachers, priests, the people you go to for help. And you were the only one who just looked me square in the eye. It's like, yeah, none of those people recognize it because all y'all journalists aren't doing your jobs well. And I was like, all right. And that's when we started talking about training, which we've done, 1-2 sessions and have tried to pitch to others. And I do it now in newsrooms that I work for, any journalists who listen to me and my students, even though that's not what I teach. But it really helped me reframe and double down on my work at the same time. So we need to do more explanatory journalism.
Yeah.
Don't need any more survivors to tell me how much it's horrible, right? It feels horrible to be a survivor of violence, to have been subjected to violence. I need to find different ways of explaining this.
Media is incredibly important, and journalism is incredibly important for who fails it, because that shapes our culture. And so that is a trickle down to everybody else that fails. Like, that's why your friends and family fail you. I've talked to countless survivors over the last 25 years, and every one of them has somebody else that failed them. Sometimes their parents failed them. Sometimes their parents were the best people ever. Sometimes it was their friend that failed them because they didn't believe them. And so then they never told another soul. They didn't report because they weren't believed by their friend. Sometimes their friends and family were fantastic, and it was the DA that wouldn't prosecute the case because they didn't think that all the jurors would give a guilty verdict, even though there was video evidence, there was physical evidence, there was there was basically a text message that said guilt, and that the DA still wouldn't prosecute. So that is the person that failed them. So the systems are failing, but there's individuals within that system that are problematic. There are really good individuals in those systems that are problematic. But if we change journalism, I bet those other things would change a lot easier. Not overnight.
It's changing mindsets. So the most prevalent violent crime in most jurisdictions is domestic violence. But let's just take larceny, which is one of the other most prevalent violent crimes on the planet. If my house is broken into, and I keep saying this, if my private property is violated, people believe me. There is no cop that's going to be like, if somebody's Mercedes or BMW, Porsche gets stolen, of course they stole it, because what were you doing having a nice car to begin with? People take it seriously. Private property we think of is inviolable. Private parts, we're still like, yes, but what did you do to make this happen? So that's where we have to change. That's where the mindset comes in. And I've talked to journalists, and a lot of them will say, well, we're not villains in the way, or some of them will say, we're not villains in the way we do. Like, no, we're not villains.
You're
but
complicit, though.
We're complicit. We're not heroes. If we keep doing stories that one after another is about a single, heavy quotes, isolated incident, they're happening all the time. If they're the most common crimes and the most common violence that's happening, how are they isolated? It's up to us to connect the dots. And I know, and I would love to speak to more perpetrators. That's hard. It's very hard to flip that script because people either don't want to admit that they've done something, or rightly so, their lawyer won't let them.
Right.
I could go on and on about that. I'll probably come back again, but I want to get to what you're doing now. You are the CEO, the head of the Callisto Vault. What is Callisto Vault, and why is it so important?
We are a national nonprofit, and we have developed technology to help survivors of sexual violence find out if their perpetrator has harmed somebody else. So in the years that I've done this work, survivors have talked to me about whether or not they reported, They did it to protect other people. They wanted to make sure that he didn't do this again. They didn't report, but always wondered if he did this again. They're always worried about the perpetrator being a serial perpetrator. When I worked with perpetrators, they were all serial perpetrators at a very young age. Granted, I worked with some of the most problematic youth.
Right, but still.
What our technology does is that anybody in the US and its territories with a .edu has free access. And if you want to find out if your perpetrators harmed somebody else, you enter the state where your assault occurred, and that's because sexual assault laws vary by state. And then you enter a unique identifier of your perpetrator. So your perpetrator's social media handle, email address, phone number, there's about 12 different things that you can use, and you put in as many as you know. And that's what we use to match on.
Why is that important?
Our system is end-to-end encrypted, so nobody can access this information. So any of the information that you're putting in cannot be held liable because nobody can access it except at that moment, except the person with the password. We use that information because a name isn't unique enough. I have a cousin named John Smith. You could have a cousin named John Smith.
Right.
So if two people put in the same Instagram handle, let's say, there's a match. What happens is that we get notified, and there's still part of that entry that remains encrypted to us. We cannot see the survivor's information, and we cannot see the perpetrator's information. So we are trying to protect the perpetrator as much as we're trying to protect the survivor, at least their information. We assign that case to an advocate who is trauma informed, who works with survivors, and then that person is also legally protected under confidentiality laws. When we assign that case, they are able to see the whole entry. So they're able to see the survivor's information as well as the perpetrator's information. And that advocate then reaches out to the survivors individually at first and to say, there's been a match within Callisto Vault. Do you want to chat? We put the survivor in the driver's seat along this whole process. So if they want to, they can meet with this advocate. If they do not want to, they don't have to meet with the advocate. If they choose to meet with the advocate, then they tell their story for the first time. What happened to them? We don't have them do that in the entry because that takes a lot of emotional labor and can be really often re-traumatizing. And so if they're not going to match, we don't want to have them go through that. And then that advocate provides them with information and options. What's a criminal option? What's a civil option? What's a Title IX option? What's a mental health option? And we'll connect them with resources if the survivor wants. Then, if it's safe to do so, after going through all of the risks of what it may mean to connect with the other person, including we can no longer guarantee confidentiality if you connect with that other person.
You and I both put in John Smith 1000, and they would give us the option also of meeting.
Correct. So if the survivors agreed to it and signed off on consent, knowing the risks of this, that they would be able to connect, to pursue healing and justice, whatever that means for the survivors. We do that for a few reasons, because a lot of people are like, why aren't you investigating the perpetrators? Well, that takes the agency away from survivors. Reporting to police can be very traumatic for survivors. And it often doesn't lead to accountability. Some survivors don't want their perpetrator to go to jail. They want their perpetrator to get help, and they want them to just stop what they're doing. I can tell you a story of why this matters. One of my dear friends is Jess Michaels, and I have permission from her to share this information. She is a 1991 survivor of Jeffrey Epstein. She was raped by him in 1991.
Yeah, we spoke a few years ago.
So for 30 years, she thought she was the only one. She thought she was responsible for what happened to her. She had all these questions, all of this shame. That is not unique to Jess. That is, most survivors feel that. Not all, but a lot of survivors
Exactly.
When she saw a picture of him in the Miami Herald, when a journalist did reporting on him, she was like, that's who assaulted me. And it was all about his sweetheart deal and how he had trafficked and raped and molested many, many, many children and women. And she tells me that that was the day her healing began, because she recognized what he did was extremely calculated. And knowing that she was not the only one, and knowing that there was nothing else that she could have done differently, because he was very manipulative and very calculated and was grooming her, that changed her healing in that day. And now you can see what these survivors are doing to try to find justice. And they haven't gotten it yet, but they have collectively have a way to do that.
Right. Right.
that is much more empowering than what they could do individually. And we saw that through the Me Too movement. You think about Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, the journalists who broke the Harvey Weinstein
Yeah.
sexual assaults that he committed. I don't want to call it a story.
Right.
And you and I went and saw the movie She Said together. One of the things in their book, she said, and the movie She Said, is that they said the survivors are only going to jump if they can jump together. And those survivors had to decide, well, who else is coming forward, but they couldn't tell who was coming forward. And the survivors couldn't decide that. And what does it mean if I come forward and nobody else did? And now my name is out in public, and that is unsafe for me because they know all of the stuff that Harvey Weinstein had already tried to do and had done to ruin their careers for 20, 30 years. But it took a story that people wanted to read about and that were curious about. And so your average Joe Schmo on a college campus is not going to be worth most journalists' time. Or most survivors aren't even going to think that that is something that they could do. But if you look at some of these high profile cases, Larry Nassar, Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein,
Cosby.
R. Kelly, Cosby, it was journalists who broke these stories because there was enough of an open secret with all of them that some journalist was like, we need to do something about this. Let's talk about it. But there was still so much danger to that it took until 2017 for these stories to get more accepted. And
danger and enabling, I'll say, because
enabling.
25 years ago, when I was living in Italy covering the Italian and other international film industries, and Miramax, Harvey Weinstein's company, opened Miramax Italia, I told my then editor, hey, I think we need to do a story that this entity only exists to procure drugs and women for Harvey. Something doesn't square up. I think we should look into this. But basically the response was, well, that's just Harvey being Harvey. That's what Harvey does. He does drugs and he does women. And we're okay with that? Like, I don't care how much drugs and how many women he quote unquote does. If it's consensual and already not like, here's a very powerful person. So how consensual might it be? But again, it was changing the mentality and realizing it's not okay. The quote unquote casting couch was never okay.
Right. But imagine if in the 90s, in the 80s, the survivors could find each other. How many would have been prevented? If they could have collectively come together and took it to a journalist then, your editors would have said, yes, let's jump on that. But if you have to do the investigation and find all of them and they're not sure and they think they're the only ones and everybody seems to be treating this normally because it's just Harvey being Harvey, survivors are going to stay silent.
The FBI's and other people's research has shown that false reporting is minimal, could be as low as was it 0.5%, up to as high, again, very heavy air quotes, 7%, I believe is what the FBI said.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem are the false denials, but the fact that we're so scared, or that so many people are so scared about the false reporting, it's like, well, and I've had even young people say like, well, what, I don't want my friend, like I would get scared for my friend to get falsely accused of something. Like, well, why don't you flip that and say that you are scared for your friend who's going to get actually assaulted, not falsely accused of something, but know that 9 out of the 10 people who have been assaulted, at least 9 out of 10 are telling the truth.
When I talk to parents, they're like, this is great. Glad my daughter has this, but I'm really worried for my son. Right. And really worried that my son is going to get falsely accused of this. And I say, if your son is more likely to be sexually assaulted while in college than they are to be falsely accused, are you worried about your son being sexually assaulted in college? I always get this look of shock because you're worried about the wrong thing. Because men get sexually assaulted in college too, and they don't have places to report. They do, but they're typically in women's centers or outreach is geared towards women.
Yeah.
There's a lot of homophobia that comes around that. And so, I mean, I could talk a whole lot about that, but I know this podcast is women.
But the flip side of all of the rectum-derived information about female sexuality is the rectum-derived information about male sexuality, right? The myths, like all of it has to be dismantled. Yeah, I mean, I'm talking to men about sexuality too. So yeah, feel free. Sort of tying what you just said with the Me Too movement, that satirical editorial by Alexandra Petrie that I love so much, Men, You Are Not the Weather. The line in there that I so many emotions when I read it, but I'm tired of confessing to someone else's crime. And that sense of people don't come forward because they're ashamed. And there is no other crime that someone else commits against you that people are ashamed to admit. People are not ashamed to admit that they've been burgled, that they're indignant, right? How dare you break into my home? How dare you steal my things? Even if it was unlocked, even if all the windows and doors were open, how dare you do this? You wouldn't shyly tell your friends after 20 years, yeah, you know what? Somebody broke into my house, which speaks to changing mentalities.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of changing mentalities, what are the biggest sexuality / sexual assault myths that you come up against in your work?
There's a million that I could talk about. There's a couple, I think, big ones that when you see them, they're pretty obvious, but they're so ingrained in our culture that we don't often see them. We talk about the safety list of how do you prevent yourself from being sexually assaulted? How do you stay safe? And so you talk about don't drink too much. Don't wear something tight fitting. Don't run at night. Hold your keys in your hand to attack somebody if you need to.
Walk home in pairs.
Walk home in pairs, cover your drink, like all of the things, right? Those are not preventing sexual assault. Those are reducing your individual risk or helping you out when you get assaulted. Like they're in the moment things of assuming somebody is going to assault you. But if you cover your drink, that perpetrator is just going to put something in somebody else's drink.
Right.
Safety lists are a way to victim blame people, because if you didn't cover your drink and you did run at night alone and you did do all these things, well, then I must be to blame. So I say all of this to say, don't drink too much is always on every safety list for women. But if I go to 10 parties and I get blackout wasted at every one of those parties, and I only get assaulted at one of the parties, my drinking has nothing to do with me being sexually assaulted. It only has to do with that one party somebody decided to sexually assault me. It is the responsibility of the perpetrator. Yes, there are factors that increase and decrease your risk, but the riskiest thing is to be around somebody who wants to assault you, and they will figure out how to do it. And if it's not to you, it's to somebody else that is at that party.
It just made me think of the myth of the stranger, which it can happen. But even when we talk about stranger rape,
that was my next myth that I was
almost
go to.
Okay. Like talking about even when you break that down, and the numbers there are anywhere from like 12 to 20%. When you start looking at those numbers, it's somebody you meet at a party. It's somebody you meet in a bar. It's not a full-on stranger, just someone who's not very well known to you, which means the other 85% is somebody you know damn well, right? Somebody who knows you very well.
Again, the media has created this image of sexual assault as somebody jumping out of the bushes at night or out of a parking garage and brutally, violently raping you. That is not what most sexual assault looks like. It looks like coercion. It looks like somebody taking advantage of, and I put that in big air quotes, taking advantage of, because taking advantage of is just code word for grooming. Yeah. It's grooming to sexually assault somebody, to rape somebody.
When I talk to students, when I talk to young people, it's like, think of it as bullying, as badgering, because sometimes coercion is kind of a vague word for people. If somebody's telling you, come on, you know you want to, you should. If you love me, you would. They're convincing you. And as I keep telling people, like, it's not only a question of someone's doing that to you. You might be doing that because we're all capable of it. So the next time you start pressuring someone, pretend that you're talking to a 10-year-old. Most of us are on board with the idea that that is absolutely horrifying. So just pretend it's a 10-year-old. Don't do it. Don't push someone. Their body isn't yours, regardless. There's no magical age at which it kind of becomes yours.
He wore me down.
Yeah.
That's coercion. Trying to get somebody to do something that they have said no to or they have not enthusiastically consented to is a level of coercion. And you're right. We use these big terms that aren't helpful, but sexual assault happens with people you know. So when I was in college, I got a rape whistle. And we always joked about the rape whistle. So you're supposed to walk across campus and you're supposed to carry your little rape whistle and then like blow it if somebody tried to jump out of the woods. And because I went to a very rural campus. Are you going to have that whistle on you when you're at a party with friends?
No.
And your friend's roommate does something to you?
No. Even if you have it, are you going to blow it when your boyfriend or girlfriend is doing that? In your apartment, in your dorm room?
Are you going to blow it at the coach who has given you the scholarship to get on a D1 athletic team, like the Ohio State wrestlers? Like the Penn State football players, like the University of Michigan football players? Are you going to blow that whistle then?
When you're Olympic team doctor?
Right.
Like Nasser?
Yeah. So I guess like the next myth is that people think that they know what sexual assault looks like, but a lot of survivors don't realize that they've been sexually assaulted until years later because they don't want to feel like they're victims. And so they want to feel like they have some control. And because of the media reporting sexual assault in the way that it has, and movies and pop culture and all of that, that, well, if it wasn't a stranger, it wasn't sexual assault. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. It wasn't sexual assault. Untrue. It has to be physically violent. Untrue. I would have screamed. Untrue. Most survivors freeze. And so they think about like, oh, well, it was my fault I got too drunk. It was
Right.
my fault I
Right.
kissed them and led them on. It was my fault because I wore too short of a skirt. It was my fault because of because I didn't cover my drink. Like, it is something that we self blame for and that we don't understand because it's a lot of complex feelings all at the same time. The ones that are not complex are the strangers
Right.
that fit this mold that we
Right.
see on Law and Order SVU. And we expect we know what to happen. And we expect that we can identify a perpetrator, but we can't.
Right.
The final myth that I'll talk about is that we think we can identify a perpetrator. Perpetrators, we have put a dichotomy about who perpetrators are, and that's they're good people or they're bad people, and typically men. 95 or more percent of perpetrators are men. So I'm going to use gendered language. Bill Cosby did amazing things in Hollywood, particularly for Black folks. He was the person that said, there will not be a white man in blackface to be my stunt double on Spy versus Spy. He was America's dad. I loved him. I loved Jello Pudding Pops. I loved Bad Albert. I loved his stand-up special. I loved all of it.
He was arguably one of the best comedians on the planet.
And he was
On the
clean.
planet.
He was clean.
I didn't love The Cosby Show because I found it to be preachy, like a lot of American sitcoms, but I never underestimated the importance of America needing to see a middle class, upper middle class
Right.
Black family on television.
Yeah. So he can have done all of these really good things and be a perpetrator at the same time. He was good. He was good. Oh, something happened. No, he can't. He's the good guy. This couldn't have done it. This couldn't have done it. And then how many women had to come forward? How much evidence, including him admitting himself that he did it.
He had the stand-up thing on Spanish Fly. He told us.
He had
in the same way that Sean Combs told us, in the same way that R. Kelly told us.
On The Cosby Show, he talked about his special sauce. Do you notice that everybody falls in love when you eat the special sauce? And he like watches all of the kids like kind of pairing off, and they're like, this is like a little bit older Cosby. And so, you know, you've got I can't think of the older daughter's name. And then you get to Rudy, who's the youngest, and her little friend like goes, ooh, I want more sauce. And he takes the sauce away from him because he didn't want the boy to do anything to Rudy.
Oh my God, I missed that.
But it was baked into the culture. And so the media now uses the like evil picture of Cosby rather than the sweet picture of Cosby to manipulate us and everything. We can't forget that he was a good guy, because that does survivors a disservice to understanding why they didn't report, why when they did report, they weren't believed, why he continued to be able to do what he did. It changes the narrative of going, but why didn't you report? The same thing with Weinstein. Courtney Love got up and told people about him years before Me Too, years and years and years, and was blacklisted. So he could be a good guy and he could do really good things and he could make good movies. Yeah. Brock Turner was a great swimmer, was a Stanford student, and also sexually assaulted somebody behind a dumpster.
An unconscious woman behind a dumpster.
Having that dichotomy is why we question survivors, because we think about the perpetrator like, well, I know this guy. He's got to be a good guy. So, well, what did you do? What were you wearing? Because we're trying to like make it make sense in our brain. It's called cognitive distortion, where instead, if we can think about, okay, there's not a dichotomy. It's a yes and. And if we can remember that, and it's not so hard to believe that these men did something, and it's not so hard to believe survivors, because every rapist, every perpetrator denies doing what they did at least one time, if not hundreds. There is not one perpetrator that is like, you say, did you commit sexual assault? And their first time saying it is, yes, I did. Yeah. Harvey Weinstein denied it. Cosby denied it. And you know what everybody said when they denied it? Stop falsely accusing these men.
Yeah. When I was teaching at SU at Newhouse, so many of the students were, wannabe sportscasters. Teaching broadcast journalism. It's like, you're going to meet some of your heroes, heroes, heroines. You're going to meet these people that you really look up to just because they're really, really good at their job, just because they're a great athlete doesn't mean they're not capable of being a shitty person in their everyday life. They can do harm.
Yeah.
It should be more understandable to all of us why Cosby and Epstein and Weinstein and so many of them got away with what they did once they were powerful, because we defer to and we enable power for the sake of power alone. Once you understand that, if you stop putting those people on a pedestal, then you can also start dealing with your quote unquote nobody neighbor who's doing the same thing.
Right.
Why would it be so surprising that
Right.
Cosby exploited his power? He chose to drug people. He was a charismatic, good-looking, powerful, wealthy, famous man. He could
He
have
could have
gotten
gotten
laid.
laid anytime he wanted to. It wasn't about sex, it was about power and
I
control.
worked around the film industry and I could get laid whenever the hell I wanted to in that
Right.
world. And I was nobody.
Still put so many famous known perpetrators on pedestals. Michael Jackson has a Broadway show.
Yeah.
Elvis is played all the time. This one's going to hurt people because it's not as well known. Prince was a problem. And we still, especially because they're all passed away, we still play their music and we still say, oh, you separate the art from the artist. But what do you think that does to the victims and the survivors that have to live with that? Like, I know a Cosby survivor, and she moved out of the country because America's dad, America's dad, America's dad. Like, she couldn't handle it because it was so triggering to her. She couldn't move on. And she did try to report it. And that is the danger of holding these perpetrators accountable, even if you don't think about them being perpetrators. But they are.
Michael Jackson is one. When people tell me people are racist, that's why they went after him, and white people aren't. They don't like powerful, Black people. I say, okay, let's remove the identifying factors. Let's say there's a guy on your block who had a terrible, abusive childhood. Let's call him Mickey. He was forced to grow up very young. He was abused to no end by his father. Mickey, in order to relive his childhood, decided to put like a bunch of slip and slides in his backyard and invite all the neighborhood kids. Mickey's Black. If we're talking racism, honestly, how many white parents in this country be like, yeah, go hang out with Mickey, right, and then take that and say, I want them to sleep in my bedroom. We alibied Michael Jackson for so long because poor guy, he didn't have a childhood and he never grew up. We knew the things that did come out, the things that nobody really denied, were that these boys would sleep with him unchaperoned in a hotel room.
I had a friend once say, well, I don't think Michael Jackson was as bad because he didn't hurt them.
He masturbated children.
And I said, what do you mean by that? And it was that he wasn't physically violent, that he used a form of like love and wooing and being nice to lure these boys into his bed. And I said, there's no Olympics in sexual assault. Like, there's no better or worse, right? Like, it's different. When you've trusted somebody and then you realize that as an adult, that I loved this person and I thought they were caring for me. And now I understand the age difference. And now I understand what happened, that I wasn't special, that I was just victimized. That changes your psychological relationship with people. And if you're brutally, violently, physically raped, that changes your safety in a different way. Not better or worse, just different. Both are problematic and traumatic and require a lot of therapy to get over.
We realize we're more quick to realize that physical violence is a choice that someone made in that moment, as opposed to coercive violence, right? As opposed to emotional violence. That an adult chooses to call something that they know is not love. Right? An adult is choosing to manipulate, knowing that they can take advantage of the lack of knowledge, the lack of life experience of a child.
Yeah, a lot of children who get groomed by teachers. And there's like, well, I thought it was consensual and I thought that he loved me and that, he told me he wanted to be with me and he couldn't wait and he wished that I wasn't his teacher and like all of this stuff. And then years later, they go back and they see that he's doing that exact same tactic to somebody else and they realize I wasn't special.
If you are actually special to someone, they're not going to take advantage of you.
This isn't fully related to this point, but it relates to a different point we made. I went and did some trainings on how the joke connects to the bruise with a very popular football team years ago. And one of the football players came up to me afterwards and he said, you said something about a woman putting a picture on a Instagram. Like, what do they expect me to do if I see them in like a bathing suit on Instagram? Isn't it their fault? And I said, okay. I said, have you ever gone to a beach or a pool? It's like, yeah. I said, have you seen women in bikinis at those pools? Yeah. Did you find them sexy? Uh-huh. Did you rape any of them? No, of course not. Why didn't you rape any of them? Well, because I wouldn't do that. Ah,
right.
So it wasn't them wearing the bikini that was the problem. Otherwise, men would go around raping everybody. You chose not to rape them, period. Anybody else in that scenario has the exact same choice.
The beach scenario is one I use often. Why have I been able to be on a beach by myself with like a group of 30 guys just down the beach for me and nothing has happened? We are basically naked on a beach. How come I've never seen mass rape? Well, that's different. If you're saying that there are these machines or animals that can't control themselves, then we would never be able to be on beaches if it were biological and physiological, which is not.
Yep.
It is power, domination, humiliation, control, alibied for so long by, well, they just can't control themselves. You used to say that women can't control themselves. Men were the rational ones, right? Historically, men were the rational ones. We just tell ourselves a different story, and it alibis men over and over and over again. And well, that's very much also tied to language. I have a loaded language in media guide. One of the terms is violence against women. You may have been the first person to be like, oh yeah, that's a bullshit term. So one of the students
And yet I still say it. I still say it, and it's a bullshit term. Because it's what people understand. So I'm only going to pick my battles with language on certain things, and I'll educate people on why that's a problematic term, but it's also, I'll use it when necessary because it's not a slur.
I'll use it in, if it's a minute and a half story and I don't have a lot of time and I have to repeat something,
Exactly.
Then, one time I might say male brutality against women, another time violence against women. Do we say violence against people who aren't police? No, there's a perpetrator. It would sound funny if we said violence against people who aren't police. Why are we naming the people who aren't violencing? So all of that is a segue into like, what are some of the biggest language changes and most important language changes you've seen in the past 25 years in your fields?
Was there something that I've said to you before that you're thinking of?
I don't know if it was part of Mend or some conference on toxic masculinity, to not use the word rape in front because that makes men really uncomfortable.
Right. And I don't know if this has evolved, but I think the more we've talked about rape and sexual assault, the more we've watered down our language, which sometimes is helpful because it allows for the conversation. And now that we've got the conversation going, it can be harmful. So rape and sexual assault are not the same thing. Rape is sexual assault. Sexual assault is rape and a lot of other things underneath it. So like grabbing somebody's breast can be sexual assault,
right.
But that's not rape. And so it's become synonymous, and we can talk about it more, but people think that, oh, I was sexually assaulted, that I was raped, and that's not the case. And so that gets really confusing. And so, yeah, this was probably 8 or 9 years ago, I was doing a conference talking about toxic masculinity and domestic violence and sexual violence. And I was told by a woman who was my boss at the time, because it was an audience of men, and she said, don't say the word rape. It will make them uncomfortable. I said, they are here to solve the problem. Why should I make them comfortable by not using the word rape when it is a term that we need to use?
And if you take their discomfort and multiply it by infinity, that's how people who have been subjected to rape feel.
I did some trainings for military at one point, and I used a clip from 13 Reasons Why that showed sexual assault between a girlfriend and a boyfriend. And I was told at the military that I could not show this clip because it was too graphic. And I said, this is a show that is geared towards teenagers on Netflix. Why can I not show this clip? And I fought it, and and they said, okay. And I'm like, you don't want me to use the clip because you haven't thought about this as being sexual assault. And I'm pointing it out, and that makes you uncomfortable. And that is the point.
Two soldiers, two people who are
Two
being trained
soldiers
to kill.
Yes. So I think that happens. There's a lot of language policing. Like, we don't say this because it makes us uncomfortable, right? And so that silences survivors. I think it can also happen the other way where people are trying to learn what not to say, and they're saying it. And we're saying, you can't say that. And they're like, I don't even know why I can't say that. And so we have to open up these spaces for people to be able to learn and make mistakes with also being able to gently correct them and to be able to make progress. You can't stop saying what you're saying if you don't understand it. I will tell people of like, oh, hey, can you skip that song when Michael Jackson comes on? And I did that. I've done this since 2005. I love his music and I just can't support it. And so when Me Too happened, people are like, oh, we should skip this song. This isn't a good person anymore. I'm like, yeah. Or then there was Delete R. Kelly, right? And I don't make a big deal of it because I get that not everybody understands it the way that I do. But I watch people go as Michael Jackson to Halloween and Elvis for Halloween. And I'm like, why do you want to dress up like a pedophile?
Yeah.
I've
seen discussions. I've seen people, music writers be like, where do you come down on the listening or not listening to it? It was like, that's not the question. Is where do you come down on the abuse of children, on the rape of children?
Yeah. Getting back to language, though, I think that there is an evolution, and I think language is constantly changing, and we need to continue to work through that. And one of the examples that I do give is that the song Baby, It's Cold Outside. I started saying that song was problematic again in the early 2000s, and people were like, you're just ridiculous. And then it became this big cultural debate of should it be played at Christmas time because it's a date rape song. It sounds like date rape. Then I learned more about the song.
I remember you asking me as well. And I was like, this song is of its time when a woman could not say, couldn't say like, I want to spend the night with you because we got to get it on. It's like, oh, I'm stuck in a snowstorm.
It was better in the 30s when it was written or whenever 30s, 40s, whenever it was written, to pretend like your person that you wanted to have sex with was going to sexually assault you and drug you and keep you there in order for you to have sex at your will. It got so far away from that, we forgot that was the original meaning of that song. So it's good that it evolved to becoming really creepy. And so we can see the evolution in that, but we also have to think about where do women get to make a choice about sex?
It has to do with language and your teaching, your response to when men say, well, it's not all men.
Yeah, with numerous men that I've worked with over the years about problematic sexual behaviors or problematic interactions at work. There's a person in particular that I think about, and I said, he's like, you think it's all men, Tracy. And I said, I don't think it's all men. I know it's not all men. I have a lot of men in my life that I love and I care about that would never do any of this. But one, it's enough of them. And I love to use this with girl dads, and I've used it often. And I said, you've got a teenage daughter. He said, yeah. And I said, what did you think when you found out that your wife was pregnant with a girl? Well, I was happy. And what did you think about when you thought about her dating just when your wife was pregnant? Oh, didn't want to think about that. Not until she was 30. Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
Why are you worried about your teenage daughter dating? Well, because I know how men can be. So when did your daughter learn that it's all men?
Yeah.
He kind of backed up and he was like, yeah. And I said, we're learning it from our fathers. We're learning it from our brothers. We're learning it from our uncles. We're learning it from the men in our life who are interacting with men who know men that we cannot. Like we need to be protected from men at a young age. And when are we supposed to unlearn that? And when are we supposed to believe it's not all men? Because we have to protect ourselves against all men to be safe. Because when you're telling me to cover my drink, who am I covering my drink for? All men.
For every man.
Yeah.
I was talking to a woman who was telling me that her father, I know her father, he's an exceptionally gentle man, but basically raised her on all men are pigs. But then so is he. He's telling her, I too am a pig.
Yeah.
To me, this is part of the social alibi of boys will be boys, because It turns entitlement, it turns rape culture, it turns temper tantrums into biological and physiological imperatives, into some kind of pseudo junk science. Well, then when it happens, often people are dismissed when they say, oh, you know that thing that you told me was going to happen? It did happen. They're like, no, it didn't really happen.
Right.
Or if it did, but what did you expect? Because you
Right.
provoked this, there's this eternal burning flame.
Yep.
The pilot light is there and you lit the match.
I had a couple of friends and they had 2 boys and then they got pregnant with a girl. And the dad said, I don't want a girl. I said, why do you want a girl? He's like, because I can control one penis of one son and one penis of the other son. I cannot control all of the penises. Oh, you are worried about what all the penises are going to do to your daughter. Like, I think most dads of girls think that. Maybe not most, but enough of them do.
If you're worried about that, then what are you telling the penises in your life?
What are you telling your sons?
If you're afraid of all the other penises, what are you telling their owners? Yeah. I get it. You want to protect those you love from harm. Wonderful. So go and talk to the harmers, to the potential harmers. Educate them on what harm is, as opposed to what pseudobiology is.
When I've gotten on podcasts, particularly with male hosts, but with both male and female hosts, they'll say, well, what can we do to talk to our daughters? And I said, we've talked to our daughters. What are you saying to your sons?
Yeah.
That's the important conversations that we need to have. We've taught our daughters a lot about consent and we haven't taught our sons enough about it.
We can empower potential victim survivors, targets. It doesn't work if we don't simultaneously or spend more time disempowering the That's what I am tired of hearing.
100%.
That's
like
delusion.
The body positivity movement, right? Oh, be positive about your body. Well, I can only be so positive as the society around me allows me to be. Yeah. Because I can be really happy with my body and it still means that I'm treated differently if I have a bigger body or a blacker body or a more feminine body.
Yeah. And I can feel fully empowered and be like, absolutely no one can touch my body, but tell that to the person in front of me or on a bus who's groping me. And I know we're running out of time, but I do want to
get to the the sexual, getting back into how does sexual violence impact sex?
How can and does sexual assault impact a person's sex life, right? And their partners. Not always, not everyone, but it can for a very long time.
I think first recognizing that sexual assault, abuse, violence can impact each person very differently. So there's no one standard way. And so if you think that, well, this happened to me and so I'm doing it wrong.
Right.
It's not. Some people have a lot more sex after they've been assaulted. Some people have no sex after they've been assaulted. And so it impacts everybody differently. And so there's nothing that's the same. So that's the first thing that I want to say. But whether or not you're conscious about how this trauma has impacted you, your body can have reactions. There is a book called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski, I think is their name. And they talk about where when you get turned on and you have trauma in your body, that you can do a brake and a gas pedal at the same time. And that's what happens for a lot of survivors of I don't want this. This is scary. There is a trigger. There is a flashback. There is whatever we want to call that happening, but it also feels good and I want to do it at the same time because this is a safe person for me. And so it's recognizing how your body reacts to that. Like I said before, there's trust issues. If a person, you were sexually abused as a child and it was somebody you trusted, that can change your relationship, that can change your sexual relationship, that can change your sexual partnership. It can have you have trust issues, or it could have you want to fuck everybody that's out there because you want to be in control. And that's what happens. A lot of times people say, oh, you'll get promiscuous after you've been sexually assaulted. Well, there might be an aspect of you wanting to get control. And just because you have a lot of sex does not mean that you have been assaulted.
That word is on my loaded language list.
Yes.
Who defines that? And do we use that word equally for men and women? We do not.
And promiscuous has a negative connotation to it.
Yeah.
So I think that it's about not owning your body, not feeling like your body, having your body be the object of this issue, right? There's so many different things that happen in your body and there's ways to get around it. You can do EMDR therapy, you can do different types of therapy, you can do sex therapy, but there's a lot of conversations that may need to happen with a partner. There's some partners that want to say, before we have sex, I need to tell you what happened. I need to tell you all of this stuff. And there's other people that are like, I will never tell you anything about it because I don't want you to know. Because if you know, then I feel like you're going to treat me differently. It's really fascinating dating. I get a lot of different comments when I tell men that I work in sexual violence. And
Mhm.
recently, as I am in my late 40s, men are starting to finally ask me if I've been sexually assaulted,
Hmm.
and they beat around the bush about it. They're like, "Well, why did you get into this?"
Right.
And then when I don't say that I've been sexually assaulted or say that I have or haven't been sexually assaulted, they ask in a different way. And they're like, "Well, are you okay having sex?" Because they think I hate men. They think, well, all these things. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a woman. I love sex. Like, of course, and that shouldn't matter. Like, you should have consensual sex and it should be enthusiastic, regardless of if that person has been assaulted or not. Because again, 1 in 2 women have
Mhm.
experienced some kind of sexual harm. So approach that in that way. It can affect your partners because there is that lack of trust that comes from trauma. It doesn't come from who you are as a person. And it's about being able to talk and hold space. And it's for what's best for the person who's been harmed. And a lot of times it's both people that's been harmed in a relationship. 1 in 6 boys have been sexually abused by the time they're 18.
Yeah.
And so, as the famous line that you have quoted me on your podcast for saying before, we we need to be able to talk about sex with our clothes on before we can talk about sex with our clothes off. Sex ed in this country is awful, which is why we don't know what to do with our bodies when we are traumatized. And because we didn't know about our bodies before that happened.
We're also a very religious country.
Mhm.
Sexuality is so much freer in Italy, even though I lived literally down the street from the Pope. In Europe, if we just look at the countries that are most like us, the cultures that are closest to us, there's a huge divide between how comfortable we are talking about sex, how comfortable we are having sex, and how much shame we may or not. It doesn't mean that that problems, that sexual assault
Yeah.
doesn't exist in Europe, in other, countries of the global north.
If you're told that you're not supposed to have sex before marriage and you do, and then you feel guilty about it, and then somebody sexually assaults you, what do you do with that? It's your fault. You were
Mhm.
supposed to keep your legs closed. I say that in massive sarcasm. You were supposed to do all of these things, and then you don't know where to put this sexual assault either because sex is bad. Like, you're taught that sex is bad or sex is something that's cut like, pure or whatnot. I think about Elizabeth Smart. She was abducted in the 90s and she was
Mhm.
Mormon when she was abducted as a preteen, I think. And I've listened to her on podcasts, and she talks about how one of the stories she was taught in religion was you can't have sex with other people because it's like having a piece of chewed gum, and how many, like, you pass the next piece of chewed gum. And so when she was sexually assaulted by this person who abducted her, she's like, I can't go back because I'm impure. I'm a sinner. And so it silenced her, and it silences so many survivors. What happens if the priest or the pastor is the one that's assaulting you?
Yeah.
You're not going to be believed. And we've seen that over and over and over again as well.
Even if somebody does believe you or somebody does say, okay, or if there's physical proof, but yeah, you provoked it. I mean, there are still
Right.
countries we used to do this, but there are still countries that will marry a woman off to her rapist
Yeah.
because it brings dishonor to the men. How drunk do you have to be on your own power to
Yeah.
think that the sexual assault of your child, of the women in your life, hurts you most of all?
Yeah. I have a friend that when their daughter was about 8 or 9, she'd started asking a little bit about sex. And they were very sex positive parents. And she asked her dad about, like, why do people have sex? And the first thing that came out of his mouth was to make babies. And he's like, I don't like that answer. And she asked him again, and he goes, because it feels good. And she's like, really? He's like, yeah, most of the time it feels good. That was like an astounding answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that child is now an adult, and she has a great, like, view of sex. And I hear about her dating girls and dating boys and dating all these people, and she's like, oh no, I'm not putting up with this, I'm not putting up with this. And she has such a positive view of relationships and sex in those relationships, and ability to say, I don't like that, that's a boundary, oh, I'm going to back away from that I never had at her age. And I don't even know if I have it now at my age. And I think that that's the empowerment that we need, right? From children, where you don't have to undo shit. Undoing shit is the hard part.
Yeah.
Undoing our patterns and undoing like our things, and just don't teach them the negative things anyway. Like, that's why we need
This is what I keep saying. Like,
positive sex ed is sexual assault prevention.
Yeah.
Because again, if we can say, oh, sex is good. I like sex. Sex is meant to be fun, and this doesn't feel fun. That's a problem. But if we go into a sexual encounter and we think, well, am I supposed to do this? Am I not supposed to do this? Gosh, there's a lot of shame. What's wrong with me? Because this feels good. I don't know how to discern that when it starts to get bad. And maybe it's too late by that time, or I don't have the words because it all feels a little bit icky because I want it to feel good, but it doesn't. And so I don't know how to speak up when it's the good kind of shame. And like, I'm putting that in air quotes too, the good kind of shame of like, this is shame from like what I was taught inappropriately, or this is not okay. And I think that when you learn how to say, this is what I like, this is what my body likes, and I want to talk about it, and I'm not embarrassed about it, then I can also say, I don't like this. And if you continue to do this, and I don't like this in the bedroom, then we've got a bigger problem, and I'm going to stop because you're not respecting me.
I feel like if we teach all men are pigs, or all, boys will be boys, if we teach this fear, then instinctively, when that presents itself, you're like, oh, this is sex. Okay, now what do I do? As opposed to, this is not sex. This is not sex because they told me it was going to be really joyful and really fun. This doesn't feel fun. I've got somebody whining at coercion, right? But if you could get even a young person to be like, they're just whining on and on and on about how like I owe them something. The hell, I'm not having fun. Gotta go.
Or even on the flip side of that, of like, oh, I think sex is supposed to be fun, and I think sex is supposed to be with an enthusiastic partner, and all of a sudden the partner shuts down and they are frozen, and wait a second, this isn't fun. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't look like it feels good. Maybe I should stop and go, are you okay? Do you want to continue?
Yeah. The flip side of that is just as important. Yeah.
It's like, that is where you recognize it. I talked to a friend once, and he said something about one experience in his 20s having sex. It was like he was fucking a corpse, and it wasn't great. And I was like, did you ever think that maybe she froze?
Mm.
And he goes, oh my God, Tracy, you're telling me I raped somebody. And I said, it's possible. Sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I didn't know. And I'm like, yeah, you probably didn't know. But that's why we need to teach enthusiastic consent. And that is why we need to teach all genders that sex should feel good.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't feel good, and if you don't think your partner is having fun doing it, and it doesn't look like your partner is feeling good, then you should stop it.
Yeah.
Because they might not be able to.
If I badger you, twist your arm, bully you, badger you into going out to eat with me, you really don't want to, but I badger you, or I
guilt trip you,
where I see that you really don't want to, but I have finally worn you down. Doesn't mean, there are plenty of people who guilt trip others, but we recognize that in a way that we do not with sexual assault, because we have normalized, for millennia, we've normalized all kinds of abnormal things. But right now we're normalizing that men are going to have to badger because women don't like sex that much, so they have to be pressured into it.
Mm-hmm.
Sex positivity, positive sex as the model for everyone is perhaps the most important element for reducing sexual assault, for increasing female agency and reducing sexual assault.
Yep, absolutely. And having better sex.
And having better, and there's... I forget about that. Even in doing this project, people are like, yeah, you're teaching people to have better sex. I'm like, no, because this is more sociology. And I keep forgetting, a byproduct of this is just better sex for everyone. Why don't we want that?
And we get so uncomfortable with it. And I have so many friends that now have teenagers, and they're like, can you have the sex conversation with them? And I'm like, happy to. Absolutely happy to. But you need to. Because you need to approach it without shame. And it's not one conversation, it's everyday conversation.
Yeah.
Really, you need to start with their baby. Every time I went to a baby shower, which is not as often anymore, I got all the boundary books. And they're like, oh, thanks for bringing sexual assault to my baby shower. But then afterwards, they were like, oh my goodness, this was really, really helpful. Now I'll talk to teenagers about it, and I just normalize it. Like, I've talked to a couple of my, chosen nieces and nephews about it, and I'm like, it should feel good. And they're all shocked by it. What? And I did not grow up talking about sex. I had one conversation, and my mom and I have argued about this over the years. Because when my nieces got a little bit older, I was like, "Are you guys talking to me? You need to talk to them about sex." And my mom's like, "I talked to you about sex." And I said, "No, you didn't." She's like, "Yes, I did." I said, "You had one conversation with me and my sister, who's a year and a half older than me, and you pulled out this medical book and you said that a penis got hard and they put it into the vagina, and that was it." And Amy, my sister, cried because she's like, "Dad does that to you?" I was probably 10 or 11 when it happened. And that was it. That was all you told me. I did not know anything. I didn't know what a blowjob was until I was way older than what I should have been knowing what a blowjob was.
I used to wonder, like, how could just blowing on?
Exactly.
I didn't when I was very little. I was like, I don't understand who does it to whom. I wonder if lesbian couples do it more, because I bet it feels better to blow on. I would have said vagina at the time, but vulva, clitoris, than a penis, because I don't know. But yeah, it's like,
yeah, and so I did not grow up being comfortable talking about sex. I did not have sex until my early 20s. I, got married in my 20s, and then like my sexual revolution came in my 30s, this was not a comfortable topic. I got good at it because of my work and having to work with teens and having to be comfortable about it, and having to not react, because I had to teach so many teens about it. And we had to talk about sexual assault and deviant sexual fantasies and about porn and about all of these different things. And I had to get really neutral about it and just to be like, this is what it is. And just had to realize that this shouldn't be uncomfortable. And then I would think back of like, man, if I would have had that level of sex education, my 20s would have been way better.
That was national gender violence expert and my friend, Tracy DeTomasi, who has helped me more than any other person on the planet become the gender violence reporter and educator that I am. You can find links to her socials, things we talked about, and the transcript of this conversation at the Women Like Sex episode, If It Ain't Fun, Don't Do It, at womenlikesex.com/episodes. Women Like Sex is a flipped script production. It is executive produced and edited by me, Natasha Sinyanovich. Website design and artwork are by Ted Nunes. Edesio Martinez is associate producer. For more episodes and swag, or to subscribe to the podcast or Patreon, please visit womenlikesex.com, the Women Like Sex YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Women Like Sex. Pass it on.